Hey, good morning, everyone. Um, been in a little bit of a panic here trying to get connected. We're having some technical difficulties this morning, but thanks for joining us here on Ask the Agronomist. Coming to you from a new location this morning. This is my luxurious home office here in my basement. So I'm like Joe Biden hanging out in my basement. Um, here in between London Mills and Fairview here at home. So we're kind of being agile this morning with the corporate vernacular that gets used when things don't go according to plan and you have to adjust on the fly. So our original plan had been to air a video this morning that we recorded yesterday at our Yield Chaser banquet, which was awesome. And we're going to talk about that here in the course of the next hour, along with some other things. However, production difficulties have prevented us from having that video ready to air. So I think what we're going to do with that is we're still going to try to use that content. And we're going to post that probably as like an Ask the Agronomist extra, so you can see a part of what Chris Carlisle and I talked about yesterday at our Yield Chaser banquet. Now, if you were there live, you got the full unedited version of Chris Carlisle and I, which to me is way better. To the super cautious people in our legal department, live unedited Chris Carlisle and I is dangerous. So we're still working on getting something put out from the video that we recorded yesterday at our Yield Chaser banquet. But this morning we're going to be live here with you in person as we normally are. So I've got some help kind of helping me watch the chat. So if you've got questions, get them in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it myself, and then some of my teammates that are watching virtually can maybe alert me to if there's anything in the chat that I'm missing. So, first order of business, I'm gonna apologize for this nasty looking makeup job that I got on here. So yesterday I kind of poked a little fun at myself at the banquet and explained how I got a pretty severe case of poison ivy around my eyes and on my face yesterday at the banquet, and I got some teasing from people that didn't realize that if you get in the vines of the poison ivy plant, even if it doesn't have leaves on it in the dead of winter, and you're tearing out fence like I was, and you're tearing those vines apart, and you're ripping the wire off, and you got sap and whatever flying around, and you're as sensitive to poison ivy as I am, you can actually get a pretty good case of poison ivy, even in the dead of winter. So I've even heard of people who were like burning brush, and the smoke and the stuff coming off of the burning brush was enough to get them infected. So I'm pretty sensitive. I don't really have any allergies. I'm not allergic to any medicines that I've found yet. I don't really have like seasonal allergies, pollen, that kind of stuff. But poison ivy, I'm pretty sensitive to that. So I have to be careful when I'm around that. And obviously, I wasn't being careful enough. So enough about uh, enough about that. So we're going to talk a lot about weed control this morning, and for those who have maybe heard some of the things in the news, you might know why we're talking about weed control here this morning, because you might be making some thinking about, or wondering about, or worrying about, do I need to make changes to my herbicide program for this year in soybeans? And so I thought it would be a good time to review some good weed management practices that really apply to all herbicide systems, and really all herbicides, regardless of what herbicides you choose to use to get a clean field of soybeans. So I've been asked this morning not to discuss the big issue that arose a couple days ago. Most of you that have been following the news or online or reading things that are in various publications probably know what I'm talking about, and that information is out there. There'll be more to come on that. It's a very fluid situation with the registration being vacated on on dicamba a couple days ago, and not really much more I can say about that, but there is information out there, and it's fairly easy to find information on that. But we're going to be talking about, just in theory here, if you're going to be trying to get good weed control in your Asgrow Extend Flex soybeans this year, or your Enlist soybeans for that matter. Um, how do I do that if I'm not going to be using dicamba? And most of you, many of you already are not using dicamba. So for a lot of you that have chosen not to use dicamba over the past couple of years, because it has gotten increasingly difficult to use it appropriately and follow all the label restrictions. There was a lot of acres of XtendFlex soybeans planted last year that were very clean at the end of the season that didn't have any dicamba on them at all. And so for some of you, not a big change. For others of you, it could potentially be a change. So I'm going to talk about weed management this morning. And we used to talk about weed control. I don't really like talking about weed control as much as I do weed management. And there's a difference. I mean, to me, weed control is you wait till the weed comes up, you spray something on it that'll kill it, and it's dead, and thus it's been controlled. That's maybe how it worked in the good old days before weed resistance and before some of the challenges that we're facing. But we've got water hemp that have been confirmed resistant to, obviously, to Roundup, water hemp confirmed resistance to 2,4-D, water hemp confirmed resistance to dicamba. Um, Probably somewhere out there, there's water hemp that's resistant to Liberty. We've got water hemp that are resistant to triazines. We've got water hemp that are resistant to PPOs. We've got water hemp that are resistant to group 15s. Now luckily, most of you don't have water hemp that are resistant to all of those, but there are a few populations out there that are, pretty highly resistant to many, 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 many different modes of action. We've got a new mode of action coming out here in another year or two that water hemp has not been exposed to here in North America, and hopefully that will provide some relief, and hopefully we can get all of the tools put back in the toolbox so that we've got all the options that we need to give us good water hemp control. But today we're going to talk about starting clean. So if you want to have a clean field of soybeans, I would say if you're planting into weeds in this day and age, you're taking a big risk of not getting the level of weed control that you would like to have in that field. So all these conversations are going to be based on the premise that we start clean. And so starting clean might involve tillage. Now, if your tillage is minimal tillage, vertical tillage, reduced tillage, if your tillage is more residue management than it is tillage, that's not starting clean. That's starting partially clean. So if all you've done to a field is vertical till it, you have not removed all the weeds. Now, if you vertical tilled it twice in the spring with a very aggressive tool, you probably did remove all the weeds. But if we're talking, one pass in the fall or one pass in the spring with kind of a conventional vertical tillage tool, at best, you might have taken out half of your weeds. And the half that's there, you're going to have to do that chemically. And if you're going to do chemical weed control in a reduced tillage system, that to me is either a fall or a spring burn down, preferably ahead of planting. Anytime you plant through weeds, you're going to stress those weeds. You're going to damage those weeds. You're going to cover them with dirt. You're going to injure them. You're going to make them harder to kill with whatever you're using to try to kill them. And it doesn't matter what product you're using, you're not going to get as good a weed control if you're trying to spray and control a weed, an emerged weed that has been driven over by a sprayer, a planter, a tractor, or what have you. So I'm a big fan of fall burn downs. If you don't do a fall burn down, I'm a big fan of a pre-plant spring burn down. And with the weed control challenges we have today, I'm very much opposed to planting a field that's already got weeds up and you have not applied anything to control those weeds. Now, sometimes the cover crop guys will, plant green into a cover crop. That's different. I don't want to plant green into weeds, cereal rye cover crop, or a nice oat cover crop, or a nice, whatever cover crop, and you want to do some planting green into a cover crop. That's a different conversation. But if your cover crop is chickweed, henbit, shepherd's purse, and mare's tail, don't be planting green into that. So, second point of weed management would be we want to lay down a strong pre-emergent foundation. And the reason we need to do that is we do not want to be relying on our post-emergence program, no matter what product you have available to you post, for 100% of your weed control, because that's destined to fail. The post programs we have available today, even when dicamba was on that list of things that were available today, are not going to give you satisfactory weed control of 100% of your weeds. We need to let soil applied residuals do a lot of the heavy lifting. And my goal is to prevent 85+% of the weeds from ever coming up. So how do we do that? What tools do we have available? So we've got our PPO chemistry. So you got your kind of, when you say PPO these days, you're probably thinking of products like Authority and Valor and things like that. Fomosafen or Resource is also in that camp. Now that product is traditionally more thought of as a post-emergence PPO, and it does have crop safety to be applied post, where our really strong residual PPOs do not have the flexibility to be applied post yet. We're working on some technology that will enable that, but that's a few years out. So we've got products like Fomosafen. We've got our, pre-emergent PPOs like your Authorities, your Liberties, Sharpen, those type of products. We've got our Group 15s. So that's your Warrant, your Zidua, your Outlook, or things of that nature. And then we got Metribuzin. And Metribuzin was, 10 years ago, kind of thought to be a dead product. That's a soybean triazine. You think of triazines typically as corn products, but Metribuzin is in the triazine class of chemistry. It's a very good water hemp product. It's actually probably one of the best water hemp products, and it really didn't get used for over 20 years. And through lack of use, heck, water hemp might have gotten more sensitive to it while it was not being used. So adding Metribuzin to almost any pre-program really bolsters your water hemp control. So some combination of those products, and I would ask you to use at least two of those. I just rattled off four different classes of chemistry, and then when you talk products, there's a lot more than four with all the different trade names and all the different related chemistries. But try to use at least two classes of chemistry that have activity on water hemp in your pre. Try to put that pre on as close to planting as possible. So, if you like to run out there in February and March and get your spraying done, and then you're not going to plant your beans until the 10th of April, not a big fan of that. That's kind of more of an early pre-plant type scenario. And all that's doing is that's letting your herbicide lay out there and break down and decompose for weeks before your water hemp even starts to grow. And with early planted soybeans, it's kind of a good practice if you just think about the herbicide aspect of it. Now you got to manage the logistics of it, and if you're going to try this, make sure you're communicating with the people that do your spraying to make sure they're on board and comfortable with this. It's kind of a nice practice to, if you've done a burn down, fall or spring, you're planting into a clean field, plant that field, and then come back after planting with your herbicide application and just lay those on top. And, the closer to emergence you can put that herbicide out there, the longer that residual control is going to last. And that might give you the flexibility to make your in crop, your post emergence in season application a little, I say little, and I mean a little bit later. I'm going to harp on that in a minute, but there are way, way, way too many weeds getting sprayed way, way, way too big with post-emergence applications that are 2, 3, even 4 weeks later than they should have been. So we'll harp on that here in a minute. But I think that kind of gives you a perspective on what that what that pre looks like. So then we move into our post emergence applications, and we really need to making those post applications on weeds that are 4 inches or smaller, and I would prefer smaller. None of us seem to be able to tell what a 4-inch weed is anymore. And if you're spraying weeds at 4 inches, there's probably some that are 6 or 8. And if you're shooting for 2 inches, there's probably some that are 4. And today they're 2 inches. Tomorrow they're 4 inches. The day after that, they're 6 inches. 2 days after that, they're 8 inches. I mean, water hemp grows fast. Palmer, which we don't fortunately deal with too much yet in this part of the world, grows even faster. And so it's hard if you're waiting for weeds to be 4 inches tall. It's hard to get them all sprayed before they're 8, 10, 12 inches tall. So we probably need to start applications when they're 2 inches or less to hope to be done with applications before they're much over 4 inches. And you really shouldn't be afraid of spraying a field too early post. I've almost never seen a weed control failure because a field was sprayed post too early. Anybody in my line of work, we look at fields all summer long that are a mess because they were sprayed post too late. And that's what gets us into some really, avoidable but unfortunate situations where we're trying to, clean up a problem. And that's just really tough to do in this day and age, effectively, affordably, and on label. And that on label piece is important. So, just because you think it's not going to hurt your beans to spray 2,4-D or Liberty, on R2 or R3 soybeans, label says R1, and we follow the label. So that means by the time your beans are blooming, post-emergence herbicide applications need to be done. And I can't say that any more clearly, any more plainly. And I hope everybody starts to take that to heart. So if we're going to make those post-emergence applications that early on beans that are sometimes, might only be that tall. So we're nowhere near crop canopy, even 15-inch rows. You cannot wait until crop canopy to put your post-emergence treatments on. That will fail 9 times out of 10, no matter what program you're doing, because by the time your beans get anywhere near crop canopy, the weeds are huge, and we can't reliably control huge weeds with anything anymore. So the way we make this work is we add additional residual to that application. So we call that a layered residual. And the trick is you got to get the additional residual on before the first residual quits working. So that's why we call them overlapping. So the idea is your pre-emergent product still working, and then we lay on that post-emergence residual to extend that control longer, but they have to be overlapping. If the pre has quit working before you put the additional residual on post, and you got this gap in between there, and you have 50 water hemp plants come up, and whatever your post-emergence product is either can't control that weed or fails to control that weed or misses that weed for whatever reason, that weed's not going to be controlled, because residual products applied after emergence don't do anything. Residual products have to be applied before the weed emerges to get control. They need to not just be applied before emergence, they have to be activated as well. So this happens fairly frequently. You make that post-emergence. I use my hands a lot when I talk. My dad teases me. He asks me, he says, can you, if your hands were tied, can you still talk? I've never tried that, but anyway, bump my computer here. So lost my train of thought. So those residual products, are preventing weeds from germinating or preventing weeds from emerging. But you have to have them on, have to have them activated. And oftentimes what happens is you make that application, what if it's 2 weeks before you get an activating rain? And, in that scenario, any weed that comes up before that residual gets activated is going to be missed. And so that's another reason. People say, oh, that's a reason. Some people say, well, it's not worth putting that product out there. Well, if you're not putting that product out there until the middle of June, you're right. It's not worth putting it out there. But if you're putting it out there May 10th, when you should be, it's going to get activated in time to give you season long weed control. So I argue that the reason that some people think that those post emergence residuals are not worth the money they cost is because they've never applied them at the right time to enable them to do their job. So stay focused on early post emergence applications. If anybody's telling you to wait till a weed is 6 or 8 or 10 inches tall because you got a stronger post program, they are wrong. That is not the right way to manage weeds. That's going to be a recipe for just making the products we still have available today worthless faster, is what that sort of management's going to do to you. So we don't want to do that. We've learned our hard lesson on how not to manage weeds when we were using just Roundup and letting weeds get big and killing all the weeds, and life was great. Life was great till it quit working, and then life got hard again. And so, we don't want to follow down that path again. And the way to not go down that path again is to spray weeds when they're small, utilize our residuals pre and post, use multiple modes of action. Don't rely on one thing for all of your weed control. And yes, that does increase the cost of weed control. But doing things that speed the development of resistance also adds a lot of cost to weed control. You do it wrong or right, so you might as well do it right. Post-emergence applications, we want to use multiple modes of action those as well when we can. I'd also ask you to remember that, even though Roundup does not control water hemp, and Roundup does not control mare's tail, and, Roundup does not control palmer, and there are things that Roundup does not control because of glyphosate resistance. Everything else that's not on that list, which is about 300 weeds, it's still pretty darn good on. So, what else is out there? Giant ragweed, lamb's quarter, velvet leaf, your grasses. I mentioned velvet leaf already. So, morning glories, all those weeds can be hard to control, but whatever product you're using to get your water hemp and to get the product, the weeds that the glyphosate struggles with today, would appreciate the help from Roundup killing all the other weeds. So there's still a lot of value in having Roundup in that tank, whether you're using Liberty or 2,4-D or whatever you're using post. Pretty important to have Roundup in that mix. So keep that in there. We're going to rely on Liberty for the weeds that Roundup by itself can't control. We need to have good coverage. We need to have the good adjuvants. We need to have AMS in the tank. You need a nitrogen source to make Liberty work good. You need a lot of spray volume to make Liberty work good. You need small droplet size to make Liberty look good. Now, you don't want to be drifting Liberty across the road either. So don't get stupid about, making a fog out there. We need good coverage. We don't necessarily need a fog. But you certainly don't want to use, the nozzles that you were required to use, when you were post applying dicamba to spray your Liberty. Because even if you crank the volume up to 30 gallons the acre, you're not going to get good coverage. Liberty is a contact herbicide, and the trick to making a contact herbicide work is coverage. We gotta coat the whole plant, coat the whole leaf. And if you're just getting a drop here and a drop there, that was great for a translocated product like Roundup or dicamba, but not for a contact herbicide like Liberty. And then the last thing is just to kind of keep it in your mind. We need to make these post-emergence applications as much based on calendar date as we do weed size. And if you follow the calendar date recommendations of 30 days or less from the application, really get yourself in too much trouble spraying those weeds that are bigger than you should be going after. Small, one way to do that, if you don't want to be doing a bunch of scouting looking for weeds, is put it on your calendar, 21 days to 28 days, no more than 30 days after the application of your pre is about the right time to be applying your post. And that makes sure you've got that overlapping piece to those residual products, which takes a lot of pressure off of the post emergence products for giving a season long water hemp control. And in rare cases, if you do truly get another flush, there may be a need for a second post emergence application, which most herbicide programs are going to come with a respray program to help alleviate most, if not all, the cost of that third trip, second post pass. And if we're making the primary post pass timely, there is plenty of time to come back still on label and clean up those escaped weeds. I know some of you will argue with me when I say this, um, but the vast, vast, vast majority of bean fields that get weedy in August, and when those weeds finally get big enough to get up above the beans, and that field that's looked clean most of the summer starts to look a little ratty, those water hemp did not come up in June and July. Those water hemp were escapes that the post emergence application missed. And we didn't catch the fact that we missed them until they got bigger than the beans, which takes about 2 months for them to get bigger than the beans. And everybody thinks that, oh, they came up late. They came up after I sprayed. And I'm not saying that that doesn't sometimes happen, but the vast majority of the weeds that you see in August that get up above the beans, I mean, that means that water hemp's like 4 feet tall. If it came up late underneath beans that were knee high when it emerged, it's never going to get to 4 feet tall. It's going to get out competed. It's going to be a runt. It's going to be a spindly little thing growing down there in the dark. And it's not going to be that big tree that's out there towering over your beans in August. Those were weeds that came up early. We sprayed them post, but we didn't kill them post. Eventually they recover, take off, and they're the ones that are making the field look bad. So my recommendation is don't worry so much about scouting fields before you spray them post, because you know when the field needs sprayed post based on when you sprayed the pre, and you don't really need to scout for weeds to do your post emergence application. When you need to do your scouting is a week after your post emergence application to make sure it worked and there's no weeds in the field. If there are green weeds in the field a week after you sprayed your application, especially if you're relying on a product like Liberty for water hemp control, it works very fast. You're going to know in less than a week whether that water hemp's going to be dead or not. If it's still got green on it a week after you've sprayed it with Liberty or 2,4-D or dicamba or any of that stuff, it's probably not going to die. And as soon as it is recovered enough that you can control it, that is a good time to respray that field when the beans are still on label, when the weeds are still small, when it's still earlier in the year. And then you're not tempted to do things that you shouldn't do, like throw herbicide in with your fungicide at R3 and try to kill some 3 foot tall water hemp plants that are right level at the top of your soybeans. So so that was my point number 4, was to scout the field before. So again, R1 is the cutoff for all these post-emergence products. The only thing that's labeled past R1 is Roundup, and that's not going to help you clean up your water hemp escapes, as you know. So all the stuff that you're going to use to hope to kill water hemp post, R1 is the cutoff, and so you need to scout those fields prior to R. We did on that post trip, and if that field's not perfect enough for you, get it taken care of before you get to R1. So the last thing I'll add here on weed management, this has been a soybean conversation, but weed management in the corn year plays a pretty important role in how much weed pressure do I have the soy in soybeans the following year. So we've still got all the tools in the toolbox in corn. The corn toolbox is really big, and the corn toolbox has got a lot of stuff in it that's easy to use. The soybean toolbox keeps getting smaller, and it's got a bunch of little tools in it that are hard to use. So there's no excuse for not having nearly perfect water hemp control in corn. And if you are not achieving nearly perfect water hemp control in corn, you are increasing your water hemp pressure in next year's soybeans. Some growers who raise conventional beans actually taught me this, how important this is, because they learned the hard way that if you're going to raise conventional beans, which means you can't use Liberty or Roundup or 2,4-D or anything but conventional herbicides, you better have fairly low weed pressure. And if you're not getting perfect weed control in corn, you're not going to have low weed pressure. You're going to have more weed pressure than you can handle. And so they learned that if you're going to make conventional beans work long term, you got to be really, really on your game to have nuclear clean cornfields, and that gets you off on the right foot the following year in those conventional soybeans. So let's see, make sure I got some text coming in here. Make sure it's not somebody on the team trying to tell me something here during the program. So that's kind of just from an overall weed management standpoint. We've got some recommendations, and this is a recommendation that we've had out for a couple years actually. So I'm gonna hold this up so you can see what it says there, and you can see in that black box right there in the middle, you might notice that word right there that people don't even want me saying. So this would be a non, these program recommendations have no dicamba, no 2,4-D in them. So you could use these programs across enlist beans, across extend flex beans, across straight extend beans, across straight roundup beans. I mean, anything but conventional, basically, because these recommendations are using PPOs, Group 15s, Roundup, and Liberty. And you can use these programs across, either platform that you are planting, either Enlist or Extend Flex, or straight dicamba for that matter, because there's not an ounce of tea or dicamba on these recommendations. So we do have recommendations. We didn't make that up yesterday. That recommendation's been out there for a couple of years, and there's been people that have used these programs very successfully over the past couple of years who didn't want to deal with how difficult it is in some states and some counties and some areas to utilize dicamba in a weed control program. So we've had a lot of experience in research and actual real world grower fields, managing weeds very successfully in extend flex soybeans. And there's been enlist growers doing this the same way, using nothing but pre-emergence, Roundup, and Liberty. So just something to keep in mind. I'm going to talk about our yield chaser banquet yesterday. I actually intended to start on this, so my apologies to Jennifer Elliott, who is the yield chaser queen. Jennifer works her butt off putting together our yield chaser program, and if not for her efforts, we wouldn't do something called yield chasers. So kudos to her. She gets a lot of help from Zach Bennis. So Zach and Jennifer put together a great program yesterday. We had, I don't know, probably 150, 200 guests there with us. We were at a very nice venue outside of Pleasant Plains, Illinois. A little bit of a plug here for Paul's Paradise. Lovely place if you're looking for a wedding venue and in the Springfield area. check it out. Beautiful facility. Very gracious hosts, and great event there. We had a really cool keynote speaker, Andrew Pritchard, who is a meteorologist from Champaign, Illinois. You might be familiar with him. Works with Eric Snodgrass, and those guys started a company in Champaign that later got purchased by Nutrien, and they're now the weather division for Nutrien. And he talked a lot about there I am gesturing again, hitting my computer. Talked a lot about weather patterns, weather modeling, weather trends. He had a really cool analogy, and you won't be able to follow this as well with the video that he had, but basically he took 50. Imagine dropping 50 ping pong balls into a container, and you drop all 50 of them from exactly the same spot. And then as they're bouncing around in that container and just bouncing off each other, just going every which way, you drop them all from the same spot, but just through random chance, they end up taking 50 different paths as they bounce around inside that chamber, just bouncing off the walls. So even though you drop them all in the same spot, they don't all end up in the same spot. And he was making that analogy. That's kind of how modeling weather works, and that's how different scenarios, and you plug the information into the model, and the model's going to spit out 50 different scenarios, and there's going to be some of those that are closer to the average of all those scenarios, and that's probably what a forecaster is going to use, is something close to the average. But there are other versions that were way away from the average, and sometimes those end up being the ones that happens. And so that's why weather, especially with more than 3 or 4 days out, even with all the technology we have today, it's really difficult to predict long-term weather forecasts, and we think of long-term as a month or 2 months or 3 months or the rest of the year. Really long term is more than about 3 or 4 days. So it was interesting. He also showed a map of the globe of where all the weather sensors are. And if you imagine some place like the United States, I mean, we got a lot of technology, and we're really into the weather, and a lot of people that are concerned about the weather monitor the weather. So I mean, we've got pretty well the entire U.S. is blanketed with weather sensing technology. So we've got really good data on the weather in the U.S. There's pretty good data on the weather in Europe. And there's reasonable data on parts of Asia. Outside of that, it was really interesting to see how just few and far between the weather measuring stations are. And then he made the point, I never really thought of this. I mean, how much of the globe is covered by water? Isn't it like 75 or 80%? How many weather stations do you think there are out in the ocean? You know, Almost none. So we're actually doing, to my way of thinking, when I looked at the map and I thought about all the variables that go into weather, we, we actually don't have enough data to accurately forecast the weather. We don't even have very good data on what the weather truly ended up being on different parts of the globe, because we're just not measuring it. So in some cases, we probably don't have enough information to put in the model for the model to even work very well. And then when you add the variability that exists and such, and it was interesting to think about, how truly difficult it is to accurately. Sometimes we have a hard time even explaining what happened with the weather. Usually we can look back and make it make sense, but looking forward and predicting is still a challenge, even with all of our technology and even with all of our information. But it's a very interesting presentation. I hope our customers enjoyed it as much as I did. The main reason we do yield chasers is to recognize our customers who are achieving some phenomenal yields. We are not the NCGA. We encourage our customers to that enter the yield chaser yield contest to also enter the NCGA contest. A few more hoops to jump through, a few more things at stake with that contest, and it's a little a little more stringent. You got some, you can't use your field view data for your entry into NCGA. We do allow field view data to be used for entries into our contest. You can draw a 10-acre region in your field region report and use that as your entry. If you prefer to use actual scale weights, you can weigh a smaller area. I think we do an acre and a quarter, which I think does match what NCGA does. So it's obviously easier to find a high yielding acre and a quarter than it is to find a high yielding 10 acres in a field. But it's a lot easier to just draw your finger around the best 10 acres you can find in your field and make that your entry. So we recognize three winners in corn, three winners in soybeans for both the northern part of our sales team and the southern part of our sales team. So we give what's that make 12 prizes to those winners, 6 for DeKalb and 6 for Asgrow. And then we also have some just door prizes giveaways that we do. Had a really good steak meal. I wish I knew the caterer's name. I would plug them as well. But did a fabulous job. I could have I could have just sat there and ate steak. And then Zach's wife, I didn't know this. Zach Bennis's wife is an amazing baker, and she baked all the desserts. She claimed it wasn't that much work. I think she was lying because she makes these little pies, like I don't know, about 3 inches in diameter in a tiny little cute little pie pan. So it's a whole miniature pie. And I know making a big pie is a lot of work, and making a whole bunch of small ones to me might be even worse. She claimed it's not that difficult, but I beg to differ. But had ice cream, so it was a lot of fun. Cal and I spoke. We were texting with each other last night. We enjoy working with Chris is a pleasure, and we enjoy working together. And we don't very often get a chance to speak together in front of a group. And sometimes people worry that he won't get to talk if he's got to share the stage with me. But we had a good time. We had fun. We hope the customers enjoyed it as well. We think we're entertaining as hell, but you guys might disagree. But we went through some pipeline stuff, and some of the things that we talked about will hopefully be available at a later date on another video. So we'll get that posted here to Ask the Agronomist website here on YouTube, and hopefully you'll be able to check out bits and pieces of that. It won't be in its entirety, but by the time the editing is done, I don't know what'll be left of me. It might just be Cal talking. I may end up on the cutting room floor on that. I'm not sure, but we're still working on that, and hopefully we'll get that out. But thanks to all the growers and dealers that support Yield Chasers. We hope to keep growing this. We had a bigger there we go End Smokehouse from Goodfield was I don't know if is it End or END. I'm going to say it's End. That's the way it's written. And then apparently Trails End. There we go. So Trails End Smokehouse from Goodfield. If you need somebody that can cook 200 or 300 steaks and make them taste better than the one that you make on your grill, call that dude. They know what they're doing. And then We Three Sweets looks like must be the name of Zach's wife's business. So anyway, very, 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 very tasty meal, and I know a thing or two about tasty food. So anyway, very good Yield Chaser program yesterday. We're going to continue that next year. We try to tweak it each year, try to make it better, try to get some really good speakers. The way you get invited to the banquet is to submit an entry into the contest. So we make it as easy as we can. We still want to keep integrity in the system, but we want to make it easy, and that's a bit of a balancing act for us. and most of our entries probably come off of field view region reports, just because that's a lot easier than getting a weigh wagon out there. If you've got scales on your grain cart, we can use those as well, or you can send a load to the elevator, or however you want to get your weight. And if you're just keep in mind, if you want to enter NCGA in addition to Yield Chaser, you got to follow their rules to qualify for their program. Their rules dwarf ours. So they're, if you qualify for NCGA, you're more than good for Yield Chasers. But our rules will not make you more than good for NCGA. So if you want to enter NCGA along with Yield Chasers, which we absolutely encourage that, we had a great year. I wish I had the slide in front of me. I don't. We had a great year in NCGA. Lot of very, very, very high performing DeKalb customers with their DeKalb corn did exceptionally well. Set a new record here in Illinois. I think 362 bushel is the new Illinois state non-irrigated record, set by Troy Uphoff with DKC 6421. And actually, our yield contest was won by the double pro version of that, DKC 6422. So that hybrid certainly had an exceptionally good year and got a lot of good feedback on that product from a lot of customers. But congratulations to all the growers that kicked butt in the NCGA with the DeKalb products, and congratulations to the winners of the Yield Chaser, our Yield Chaser contest. And stay tuned for more information on next year's contest. But we grew this year, had more entries this year than we did last year. Our goal for next year will be to have more entries than we did this year. And if we could get the whole team to engage in the contest the way Jennifer does, we'd have like 1,000 entries. So we just need a little bit of Jennifer to rub off on the rest of the team, and we'll be good there. So I don't think I see any questions coming in on the chat, and we're probably just going to let this episode end a little bit early here this morning. If you did have a quick one, try to get it in. Our next episode, if I'm not mistaken, still says it's January on that calendar. I think it's February 22nd, I believe, would be the next, would be 2 weeks from today. And don't have any clue what we're going to be talking about on that episode yet, but we'll try to think of something good, and hopefully we'll have some of your questions to kind of help. It's always better when I get questions, because I always feel like it's better information for you if I'm answering a question versus just talking about what's on my mind. So as you have more questions about what's going on in the herbicide world, talk to your dealer, talk to your local sales rep, talk to, there's going to be lots of, as they say, it's a very fluid situation. And we're going to try to keep the information coming out to you, keep you posted as best we can, and navigate that situation. A lot of people working on that, and stay tuned and see where that goes. But thanks for joining me here this morning. We'll go ahead and give you about 10 minutes of your time back, and we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Take care.